All right. Sorry about that, guys. My phone storage ran out, and so I was right in the middle of second question, so we'll just have to go back to it. So I've got f of x equals 1/2 x, g of x equals 3x. We wrote out f of g of x and g of f of x. We put in 3x in for the g of x. So right now, let's put 3x. So we're putting that in for the x. So think of what's still happening to the x. It's being multiplied by 1/2. So what's 1/2 times 3x? Well, it's 3/2 x. Well, does that equal to x? Nope, doesn't. So is 3x an inverse of 1/2 x? Nope, because you can think of it, what would undo a half? Multiplying by 2. So if that was a 2x, then that would work. So if you can get to this, and you can see that it doesn't simplify to x, and you don't have to do the other side. Just give me a big fat no and show me the one that you did do. Okay, so that's number 2. Let's try a third one. So we're verifying them. So we're finding f of g of x and g of f of x. All right, number 3 here. Okay, go ahead and write f of x equals 2x minus 3. And then g of x equals 1/2 x plus 3/2. So to check to see if they're inverses, remember we're finding f of g of x and g of f of x. If they both simplify to be x, we could say yes, they're inverses of each other. So let's put g of x. What's g of x? Let's start with that. Is 1/2 x plus 3/2. So we're putting that whole thing in for this x right here. So what's still on the outside is 2 parentheses 1/2 x plus 3/2, and then we still have a minus 3 on the outside. So you're putting this whole thing in for just this x. We still have a 2 on the outside, we still have a minus 3. So we've got to distribute the 2 first. Half of 2 is just 1x or just x. 3/2 times 2 over 1 is just 3. And then we have minus 3. So in this case, the 1/2 and the 2 simplified first when we distributed. Now we could say that this is just x. So far, it is good on that side, so we do need to check the other side. I need to see both for full credit here. So put f of x, this whole part is 2x minus 3. We're putting that in for this x. So this is our new input, so we still have 1/2. What's our input? It's 2x minus 3. We still have plus 3/2 on the outside. And then again, simplify. 1/2 of 2 is just x. Half of negative 3/2 plus 3/2, which then simplify and you're left with just x. So as long as you can show that they both simplify to x, and I need to see your work, then it's yes, they're inverses. All right, we have one more that's a higher power for number 4. All right, number 4, if you could write down f of x. And on the worksheet, if there's other letters like h of x or g of x, you're just composing them for each other. G of x, it could be any variables. But I'm just putting it for our notes. F of x equals a positive and negative square root of x minus 3. And then g of x equals x squared plus 3. So the reason now we know this is a parabola that shifted up 3. This is a sideways u that shifted to the right 3. And that's bad shape. So this only is the square root function, but the minus shows that it would be the whole sideways u. So that's why I have the plus or minus there. You don't necessarily need to put that in when you're verifying it. Just know that that's why it's there. Okay, so what do we need to find here? F of g of x and g of f of x. So we need to find both. So make sure you show me, unless you see that one of them isn't the inverse, then you can stop. G of x. we've got x squared plus 3. So we're putting, make sure when you look at that, you're putting that in for the x here. So you don't need to show me the plus or minus though. Underneath the square root, you've got the x squared plus 3. You don't necessarily need it in parentheses. Then you have a minus 3 still. So it's all underneath the radical. So then that cancels first, the 3 and the negative 3. And I do want you to write this step out. And then that would equal 2x, the square root of x squared. So the other way, you're putting the f of x, which is the square root of x minus 3, in for the x. So you're putting in the square root of x minus 3, you're squaring that, and then you have a plus 3 on the outside. I'm just going to put equals all the way down. And then this time, okay, here, the plus 3 minus 3 canceled. Here, the root and power cancel. So x minus 3 plus 3, which then these cancel to be just x. So they are inverses of each other. Okay, so if you feel like you're good with material, try the practice. There's 9 questions that you have to verify. There is the bottom one that if you're picking one that's a no and you're finding the real inverse. All right, have a great week. And if you need a couple examples, I have 2 more that I want to show you if you need a couple more to practice. Okay, so for number 5, I have written down for my extra examples, I have f of x equals, I wrote down the cube root of x over 2, and then I have g of x, where did I write it? G of x is equal to 2x to the third. Okay, so those are, we're trying to see if that works. So let's find f of g of x first. All right, so we're putting g of x in for the x there. So we've got the cube root of 2x cubed divided by 2. All right, so we've got the cube root of 2, and then we know that we have the cube root of x cubed is just x, so we have the cube root of 2 over 2. All right, does that cancel? No, that does not cancel out, so I know they're not inverses. So if you think about, what would be its inverse, all right, let's think about this. Let's switch the x and y. Let's call this x equals 2y to the third. So divide by 2, and we have y to the third, and then we take the cube root. So we see that its inverse, g of x, should have been the cube root of x divided by 2, all underneath, and that's not what we're given. So these two are not inverses, but this would be the inverse. All right, so that's how you can check to see if it's inverse. All right, so one more that I was going to check in with you on. So for one last question, just if you needed some extra help, or just check in a couple more examples. Number 6, I wrote f of x equals x to the 5th minus 3. G of x equals the 5th root of x plus 3. So again, it's just showing you how to set up if they're inverses. So let's find f of g of x and g of f of x. So let's start putting g of x is the 5th root of x plus 3. So you're putting this whole function for the x. So you're copying down the 5th root of x plus 3. You're still raising it to the 5th power, and then you're subtracting 3. So let's see how the other one would look. So what's f of x? X to the 5th minus 3. So you're putting this whole thing underneath the 5th root. So underneath the 5th root, what's your new input? X to the 5th minus 3, and then a plus 3. So let's look at this one. We undo the power and the root first. So we get x plus 3 minus 3, which is x. This one, we undo the plus 3 minus 3. So it's the 5th root of x to the 5th, which is x. So yes, they are inverses. They're functions. The function and the inverse composed to be equal to x. All right, let me know if you have questions at all. Have a great week.